Good morning and welcome back to On the Virg podcast, your conservative voice of Southern Oregon. And today is Friday, July 18th. Today we are introducing our guests. I always let my guests introduce themselves, and I'm going to let Matt introduce himself. Go ahead, Matt. Who are you and what do you do?
I'm Matt Hill, and I'm Executive Director of Douglas Timber Operators here in Roseburg.
Cool. Now, you and I met, it's been when I was first campaigning, but prior to that, you're also a search and rescue member as well. And we've known each other, probably 5-6 years so far.
Sounds about right.
So yeah, it's been a great relationship. Matt, you're pretty involved also in some government stuff. It's not just with Douglas Timber Operators, but also I think with Indian relations. Is that correct?
Yeah, I worked for 10 years in the Senate back in DC, handling natural resources issues, federal Indian policy, energy issues, a lot of things having to do with Douglas County and Southern Oregon. And I continue to do a lot of that work back in DC, part-time with Douglas Timber Operators, part-time working on Indian policy issues in front of Congress and the administration.
Great. And thank you for the work you do. So Douglas Timber Operators, tell me a little bit about what is that organization? I mean, how many people does that represent? A lot of people have heard the phrase Douglas Timber Operators, but I don't think they really understand what it is you guys do, and also some of the stuff you give back to the community as well.
Yeah, a lot of people think DTO is a mill. I wish we were a mill. I wish I was running a mill, although
Make a lot more money.
Yeah, maybe not right now, but in a year. We're actually a nonprofit organization that is an advocacy organization. Our members are mills and loggers and landowners and Indian tribes and regular citizens such as yourself that support the sustained use, multiple use mandate on federal and state lands and sustainable production of timber off of private lands. So we work with federal and state agencies on that and try to make sure that there continues to be a timber economy that supports jobs in our community locally.
Yeah, and my experience is it's a very powerful organization that you guys have. I know often you'll write letters to us and for us, myself and some of our senators and representatives meet with some of your folks as well. Interestingly enough, to add into the mix, I don't think most people realize that there is a lot of timber holdings that are owned by the Indians, in particular our local Cow Creek Band of the Umpqua Indians. Expand on that a little bit. I know of some. I know of a recent area that they were given or purchased or however, but I don't know that much about it. Maybe you could expand on it just so people can understand.
Yeah, it's a complicated history, but the short story is, before settlement by the Americans in this area, the Indians were here through a series of treaties and agreements and movements in Oregon. The land was ceded to the United States. Some tribes retained reservations, others did not. Some were removed to distant reservations, some were not. Very complicated, very sad history. In the recent decades, much has changed. So in 1954, all tribes in Western Oregon were terminated by an act of Congress, meaning that they no longer existed in the eyes of the federal government.
I've heard that.
That was the Western Oregon Termination Act. So in 1955, there were no tribes officially in Western Oregon. In the 1970s, tribes began to get restored to federal recognition. So the Siletz tribe was first, Grand Ronde, Cow Creek, Coos, Coquille, Klamath were all restored to federal recognition, but they didn't have any land. And so Congress, step by step, has worked to restore some limited amounts of homelands to tribes. And most of that has been forest land. So they've generally taken BLM land and returned those or conveyed them to the tribes. So most recently, the Western Oregon Tribal Fairness Act of 2017 conveyed about 16,000 acres each to the Cow Creek tribe and the Coos tribe. So every tribe in Western Oregon has at least a small timber holding. They manage those actively. They sell their logs to local mills. They manage them according to their own regulations. And then many tribes continue to purchase lands with revenues that they generate and add those to their operable land base. And it's been a great partnership with our community and our mills, because they're not locked up like federal lands, and they're used responsibly and managed responsibly.
Keeps our people working too. I know a lot of folks have the misconception that the biggest income earner and the reason why the tribes have all the money is through the casino systems that they have. Uh, I didn't realize till I actually got into the legislature that 80% of the gambling in the state is actually state-owned gambling, and 20% is Indian-owned. So, not saying that they don't make some money from the casinos and the hotels and the resorts, but frankly, they do an amazing job at those resorts and hotels and casinos. But they need the other for income, forest products. And I know the Cow Creeks have some ranches as well. What is it? The K-Bar is actually their ranching system, but it is an interesting thing, and it's obviously become a part of this, Southern Oregon. I mean, they are part of our economy, part of our agricultural stuff. I mean, it's just where they are. One of the things and I know you know a lot about this, is I know a fair amount myself, but I wanted to talk about the Rock Creek Fish Hatchery. So, being part of search and rescue, I was actually on scene on the Thursday of the Arch Creek fires. We actually went there and inspected that site, and it was pretty much a total minus one building, and a lot of dead fish because the Arch Creek fire. I'm not exactly sure what killed the fish, if it was the smoke or if it was the lack of circulation, probably a combination of the two. And it's been very controversial to try to get that fish hatchery fired back up and running again. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife wanted to close it. Myself and Senator Brock Smith and Douglas Timber Operators and others have been trying to keep it open because we do feel like there's a need for those. But tell me a little bit about what's happening there that you're aware of, and it's kind of what your guys' role has been in that.
Well, if I could go back 100 years first, I think it's important for people to know that state hatcheries have existed and operated on the North Umpqua River for well over 100 years. And there was the first hatchery was kind of in the Idlewild area. There's Hatchery Creek runs in there. And then my great-great-grandfather built a satellite operation up at Steamboat Creek. And then in 1900, 1920, 21, he built the first iteration of the Rock Creek hatchery, which was on the other side of Rock Creek, kind of where Tioga Lane is now. And then it was eventually moved. There was a trout hatchery and a salmon hatchery, and then they were combined into a combined hatchery at the present site, and then that was renovated.
Interesting.
Hatcheries have operated and cultivated fish in the Umpqua River system for over 100 years. When the Archie Creek fire happened, it burned, the vast majority of the structures at Rock Creek, the concrete raceways, the pools where the fish live remain largely intact. A lot of the machinery, the pumps remain somewhat intact. What killed the fish, I think, there was juvenile fish in one pond and adult fish being prepared to spawn in another pond. I think it was the circulation and filtration system that got the juvenile fish and killed, I don't remember the number, but a lot.
It smelled like a lot.
Yes. But miraculously, the pool where the adult fish were had natural flow coming in from Rock Creek. And so even though the power went out and the pumps stopped, the flow was still moving through there. And to their credit, ODFW, with help from the county and others, went up and rescued those adult fish, put them into liberation trucks, moved them to Coal River's hatchery on the Rogue, and spawned them. And the progeny of those fish are in our rivers now, and it's being caught. So
Yeah.
that's kind of to that point. And then the story took, a curve, which was the state, at the direction of the legislature, did a statewide analysis of fish hatcheries to determine infrastructure needs, costs, available funding, those types of things. ODFW identified Rock Creek as being kind of the worst in terms of infrastructure needs and costs and challenges. But there are a lot of biases to that analysis. First of all,
So there was a lot of money, insurance money, that never got used to rebuild.
exactly,
Yeah.
and so they didn't count the insurance money towards the cost of reconstruction. They just said we need to spend all this money on reconstruction, and then they said, well, we need to build a $9 million solar array so that the whole hatchery is powered on solar energy, which is totally unnecessary. So the cost was
And the trees, yeah.
and so there are a number of things like that, and that's when local supporters like DTO, the Umpqua Fishery Enhancement Derby, turned to our friends in the legislature and said, we need some intervention here. And you and Senator David Brock Smith sent, a strong letter to ODFW asking tough questions about the need for Rock Creek and what the real cost for reconstruction is and the importance of it. And I also want to give credit to the Cow Creek tribe, they were having their own discussions with ODFW about the importance of that hatchery and those fisheries to their tribal members as well as to other tribes. Every tribe in Western Oregon, 5 of them, have weighed in support of Rock Creek because some of their members are utilizing fish in the Umpqua River for cultural, traditional subsistence purposes. So there's huge local support for the hatchery and for its mission.
Now there was opposition locally too. I was so laser focused on making sure that we got the money that we needed. I really didn't pay much attention to the opposition on that. But who would oppose a fish hatchery? I mean, uh, I don't know. I mean, who was it? Do you obviously have more of a handle on that?
Yeah, there are special interest groups who categorically oppose fish hatcheries. They believe that there should be no intervention, no supplementation of the runs, that all hatchery fish are somehow genetically inferior or have behavioral differences from wild fish. But it's important to note that ODFW has a hatchery policy that is very rigorous and very strict. And these fish aren't coming from Minnesota. They're coming from the wild fish in the river. And so you've got tens of thousands of years of genetic, continuity that continues into that hatchery fish. And any behavioral differences, and the science shows those, any behavioral differences from the hatchery fish are ameliorated within one generation, and they're behaving just like wild fish.
I had a recent interaction with ODF&W. They were talking about closing the Umpqua River and others, but mostly that for salmon, or that was steelhead. Anyway, salmon fishing, um, because of the numbers being too low, and the numbers they were getting back were saying that they either have to shut it down for a year and then reevaluate, or whatever. We had a meeting, and what became really clear to me was I have fished the Umpqua River system. I grew up fishing here. I actually put fishing line on my fishing pole last night in my living room because I need to start fishing again before I go crazy. But they ODF&W kind of just basically they were gonna make that decision to just shut everything down, and I'm going, wait a second. You can't just shut down a fishing season and expect our guides to be able to survive, our hotels, our restaurants. I mean, they were going to shut it down to the Winchester Bridge, I think it was, or the bridge at Reedsport. And and so anyway, I actually was the one that came back to him with an idea of, limiting the take. And they immediately said, well, not immediately, over the next 2 days, had interactions, and they were saying, well, it's too hard to enforce. I said, well, you do it on the Columbia. You limit the days in the take on the Columbia for, sturgeon. Why not do it on the Umpqua? That way, at least people can still book their fishing trips out until you get to your limit or whatever, and keep things rolling. Well, ultimately, that's kind of what they did. I wanted 750. I think I got 500, but it's better than shutting it down, and it'll keep people working. And in my opinion, in this community, in this county, and Coos County as well, and we need to keep people working. Which kind of leads me into another thing I wanted to talk about a little bit, and that was recently I've been listening to some Oh, I'll say progressive podcasts locally here that are not very conservative, and I've heard them say some crazy things, and that is that the timber industry is way over logging right now, and we're not necessary. And I can't believe that we aren't spending money to try to bring in alternative businesses here. This timber industry is not paying living wages. I mean, all these things, all these accusations. Having worked for Roseburg Forest Products when I was younger, and I've worked in the woods as well, I completely disagree. Of course, I don't get on there to comment on their podcasts, but you're familiar with the timber industry and what our take is today and what the situation of our forests are. I have my opinions, and I'm sure I'll talk about those a little bit. But give me an idea in your mind what our take is from the national forest now, and then we can talk a little bit about Trump's big beautiful bill, which is also going to be those some issues with that as well. Uh, Tell me where you think what our take is now and where it should be, and how we're mismanaging our forest because we're not doing that.
Those are all big questions.
I know they're all big
Try to
questions.
take small bites off at it. But first of all, I also just want to say thank you for you and Senator David Brock Smith for what you did and the legislature's funding bill to keep Rock Creek Hatchery
Oh,
going for the next couple of years, which gives us some time to work out a long-term.
forgot to mention that part. Forgot to brag about that. So yeah,
The punchline.
we did get some money for the Rock Creek Fish Hatchery. Yeah, it's 1.4 or something like that, but it will help out with it for a couple of years of operations and hopefully renewable and keep things rolling forward. So yeah, I mean, we're all about the community.
Yeah, thank you. On timber, it's said that forests are Oregon's greatest resource, and they can be an asset or they can be a liability. And for generations, and when we grew up here, timber paid for everything. It paid for the roads that we drive on. It paid for our schools and our libraries and our public safety and our public services from the county. It was a high earning job for middle class and upper middle class families. It brought in massive amounts of money into this county to pay for things. And Douglas County is limited in how much space it has for development of private land that can be taxed with property taxes. And so there's a cost to having 1 million acres of Umpqua National Forest and all the land that we have in BLM ownership. And that cost is that it's not subject to property taxes. And Congress originally set up revenue sharing formulas so that counties would be made whole for that. And it's different for Forest Service and BLM. Forest Service, 25% of timber receipts from a timber sale goes to the county. For BLM, it's in statute 75%, although that was changed to 50%. Now it's back to 75%. But the idea was that counties need, we're sending sheriff's deputies all over. We're sending search and rescue. We're providing services, even though the feds aren't really paying into it. That was great when timber was being harvested. The steep decline in the late 80s and 90s changed all of that, and our county is in a very different situation now. We're just this year, I think we're facing a $24 million deficit in the county budget, which they're only able to cover because they had squirreled away money from the big timber years.
Yeah. Oh, and they've laid off people.
Yeah, they've downsized
Considerably,
significantly.
yes.
So to answer your question, what are we cutting and what are we not cutting, and is that sustainable or not? On private land, the harvest of timber is governed by the Oregon Forest Practices Act, which occasionally gets amended by the state legislature, and that sets very progressive restrictions and requirements on what you can cut, when, where, how, what you have to leave behind, and that changes. Just a couple years ago, the legislature adopted the Private Forest Accord, which broadened reserves that have to be left and areas where you cannot use herbicides, and that reduces the land available for timber harvest. So, but over time, timber harvest on private land, at least for the last 50 years, has remained fairly constant, and it's below the annual growth rate, but fairly proportionate to the growth rate. which makes sense. If you own a tree farm, you're going to grow it, you're going to log it,
That's
you're
agriculture.
going to replant it, and it grows back. And everyone's doing the same thing. On federal lands, it's very different. The Umpqua National Forest, for example, grows somewhere between 600 and a billion board feet a year every year. And
So on that comment, explain what that means.
what's a board foot?
Yeah, I mean, because I don't think people understand. It's like, well, that doesn't mean you're growing a billion new trees, right? That means you're growing the tree that's existing, and because we are not managing our forests, that could even go up if the tree had a place to go, but they're all bunched together. Just expand on that a little bit. Since I know you're the expert at this stuff.
Well, a board foot is a measurement of volume of wood that is 1 foot by 1 foot by 1 inch. So if you imagine slicing through a log and creating a 1 foot square that's an inch thick, that's 1 board foot. And so a log is scaled and measured according to board feet, and that's how loggers, when they deliver logs to the mill, that's how it's measured and paid for.
One lineal foot of a 2x6 is 1 board foot.
Yeah.
That puts it in perspective.
And so, there's growth rates, and then there's mortality from fire and bugs and disease and things like that. So there's natural causes of death of trees, and then, there's the human harvest of trees that can remove that from the landscape. So, looking at the Umpqua, 600 million to a billion board feet, somewhere in there, every year that's growing. And so when you don't harvest that, it's just adding on to the fuel that's there.
Yeah.
And before we were here, that would have been managed by fires and natural disturbance, and there's a natural carrying capacity on the land. And like you said, the more trees that get bunched in there, the more competition, then you have mortality, or the trees don't grow as fast. And so it was over millennia, managed on its own. But we try to replicate some of that, which is, we know that, there has to be removal to make that forest healthy, to control those fuels. And timber harvest can play that role, either through commercial harvest or thinnings or those types of things. But just to give you a scale of what's growing versus being harvested on the Umpqua, let's be conservative. Let's say it's growing 600 million board feet a year. The current harvest level by the U.S. Forest Service is 23 to 25 million board feet. So every year you're leaving 575 million board feet of growth every year, and yet we're burning far more than that.
Yeah.
And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars fighting those fires
out and causing all kinds of.
And so the forest has gone from being an asset that helps pay for everything in the community and provide living wage jobs to being a liability, not only financial, but in the smoke we breathe, in people getting lost on trails and not being able to use your trails because they're strewn with fallen trees, or even the rivers are closed to rafting. So it's not like it was when we were growing up here, where there really weren't any fires.
No, we didn't have much for fires back in those days. Hold that thought. We're going to take a quick break to talk about some of our sponsors, and we'll be right back in just a minute.
Is your 4x4 ready for the trail? Twin Peaks Off-Road is your first stop for maintenance, repairs, and custom upgrades. From differential services to winch installs, we do it all. Fast, reliable, and built for adventure. Don't wait for breakdowns in the backcountry. Call Twin Peaks Off-Road today at 541-900-0015 or visit twinpeaksoffroad.net. Keep your 4x4 off the roads and in the adventure.
I want to thank one of our sponsors of this show, Diamond Lake Mini Storage. If you need a little extra space, I will always recommend Diamond Lake Mini Storage. They have 45 brand new units ranging from 50 to 250 square feet with a safe and secure and clean facility. But they're more than just a storage business. They proudly support our local community through 4-H, UAC, Meals on Wheels, and other great programs that make Roseburg stronger. Ask about their move-in specials and visit them on roseburgforrent.com. That's roseburgforrent.com, storage with heart right here at home. All right. Welcome back, and thanks again for joining us here on the Verge. And we were having myself and my guest Matt Hill. We're just having a discussion about timber harvest, and the condition of the timber in the Douglas County, and particularly Umpqua National Forest. And I had a couple of questions that had kind of came in, and we'll just go ahead and start out there. Uh, we just got into Matt. We just got into discussing about different forest management and practices and everybody, and I hear things from the environmental side. They're like, "Hey, we don't like those clear cuts. We know that if the Trump administration's new changes are just going to allow you guys to mow down the entire national forest, et cetera, et cetera." Talk about that. What are the differences between, say, private forest land and federal forest land? How we can manage them?
Sure. You know, private forest lands are governed by Oregon state law. And when you look up on the hill and you see a geometric design that's a clear cut of some sort, that's being done on private land according to Oregon forest practices. So there's a limit, 200 acres or so of what they can do, but they're also required to leave trees and protect riparians, buffers, and all of those types of things. On federal land, it's a totally different system of rules and regulations. First of all, 80 to 90% of BLM and forest lands in this area are virtually entirely set aside from timber harvest. Whether it's riparian reserves or owl habitat or marbled murrelet habitat or recreation areas or wild and scenic river or roadless areas or wilderness areas or you name it, there's a whole series of reserves. So the amount of area that's even available for commercial timber harvest is minimal. In those areas, you still have to go through wildlife surveys and archaeological surveys, and you have to lay out these timber units in an extremely environmentally sensitive way. And in more cases than not, you're really looking at some type of thinning type project to produce volume, either at various intensities of thinning or alongside the road, or if you're trying to reduce fuels to influence fire behavior in the future. It's going to be according to that. It goes through a public review process. People can appeal and litigate,
This
and
is on federal
on
lands.
federal lands, on BLM or Forest Service. So, when we talk about, potentially increasing timber harvest on federal lands, it's going to be done in a very conscientious manner, and that's consistent with a lot of different competing values that have to be balanced before any tree gets cut down.
It's interesting. I have often, being a legislator, I often hear from the environmental side and, of course, the conservative side. But a lot of the folks that are in contact with me, and frankly, they're not always very nice. Some of the letters are, because they just hate loggers and logging. And some of the folks are from Tiller, and there has been some real issues with why did Tiller dry up and shut down, right? Why is there no store in Tiller anymore? Why is there no school in Tiller? Why is there no post office in Tiller? And most recently, no, I believe the Rangers station is closing. And my response to them has been, part of the great part of living in Tiller is the fact that you live remote. I mean, you are out there, and that's, that your services are limited because of that. But you have to also remember that what built Tiller, which was timber. They were harvesting timber. I know all those roads that go up into the woods are all paved. They're in pretty poor disrepair at this point. That they're paved, and sometimes I don't think people understand that when you take away an entire industry that was built towns and courthouses and infrastructure for cities and counties, you take that away, there's no money to do it all over again, and there's no money to sustain what you had. And I hate to see that happening here in Douglas County, because when I was a kid, I remember fishing out in the North Umpqua. My dad and I used to go up there on the weekends a lot, but we also hunted, and I remember I remember seeing log trucks during the week. A log truck was every 2 minutes, I think, we'd come down there. And honestly, we like to hunt in areas that were freshly cut, because that seems to be what attract the deer. I don't know if they eat the tops of the trees or whatever it was, but I mean, it was just one of those things. Now, recently, also, the fires have caused some real havoc in the North Umpqua, including raising the water temperature at Rock Creek. That was some discussion. I have heard as much as 2 degrees because of the lack of shade, the lack of the natural cover that used to be there. But as you've seen, because you live up, I think, and Glide area. But as you've seen, a lot of these fires are starting on old burns. And the federal forests, they're not taking out those trees. The private forest, I noticed after Archie Creek, they came in and anything private or county, it looks like they logged it and they took it to the mills. But on the federal stuff, those dead trees are still standing. Uh, I mean, you can't fight a fire in a forest of dead trees. So they will be likely the next area that gets an ignition of a fire from lightning or whatever. And that fire will spread. That's what I saw during Archie Creek. Hopefully, maybe some of the changes to the federal with Trump's big beautiful bill, maybe some of that will change. I don't know. But on that segue, Trump's big beautiful bill did change the forest, I guess, management situation that we're going to have. We're going to take some more timber, but I'll let you explain the bad side of that and the good side.
Yeah, a lot is happening with the Trump administration on federal forest policy, and from my perspective, it's all very well intentioned, intended to really be a sea change in how our federal forests are managed, and I appreciate that. It's been a long time coming. In Oregon on federal lands, I don't think we've seen this level of federal attention to forest management since the spotted owl crisis, and President Bill Clinton, Vice President Al Gore came to Portland and had a forest summit and created the Northwest Forest Plan in an attempt to create some type of balance between protection of habitat and sustainable supply of timber to our mills. Of course, that plan has failed utterly on multiple levels and is in the process of being at least amended, not revised. What the Trump administration has done, it really started at the top. And so you had an executive order on the importance of timber production, its place in our national security structure, our housing, those types of things, and it directed the Secretary of Agriculture and Secretary of Interior to implement policies consistent with that. And so we've seen the Secretary of Agriculture, the Chief of the Forest Service instituting policy changes intended to increase timber production on Forest Service land. On the BLM side, we're still waiting to see more details of what they intend to do.
BLM never moves fast.
No. And then on top of that, Congress enacted the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which is a budget reconciliation bill. So it's not, its form isn't a policy bill, it's a budget bill, but it creates policy changes to enact budget changes in terms of raising or lowering federal revenues. And one of those provisions, several of those provisions had to do with federal timber production. Again, I think the intent was good, unclear what the impact will be. So for example, there's authorization for 20-year timber contracts on federal land intended to give industry some type of certainty of federal log supply in case they want to build a mill or invest in some type of new technology. The intent is good, but there's a lot of questions we have in terms of competitive questions. If one mill gets 20 years of supply, the other mills don't get that supply. Do they get protection of that agreement? Can the next president cancel that agreement? Is it subject to environmental reviews? And so just a lot of questions about how that would be implemented. The big problem we have, and especially here in Douglas County with that provision, is that, again, I said these provisions were intended to raise revenue to the Treasury. And so what the Congressional Act says is that any timber revenue the government gets from those timber sale contracts goes straight to the Treasury, bypassing the county revenue sharing formulas that have been in place for nearly 100 years. And so Douglas County will not get any return on those timber harvests on federal land, which further complicates our county budget situation.
We get a small amount now from whatever's harvested, but we will get zero.
Zero.
Yeah. Yeah, I was had a brief conversation with Commissioner Freeman about it, and he was pretty upset with that. That could be devastating. In some ways, I tried to look at both sides of it, and I thought, well, if our mills come back, then so do our jobs. So there's money into the economy. There's money into saw shops and tires and whatever corresponds to logging or timber harvest. But the problem is the money that the county would normally spend on infrastructure projects or whatever it is that they're getting from that money just wouldn't be there anymore. So we can't. So then you come up with the question: do we raise property taxes? And that opens up a whole nother can of worms. So I mean, the county has to be funded, and right now we don't bring in enough property taxes to pay for the sheriff's department. I mean, so yeah, it's a real catch-22. While I'm really happy to see that the Trump administration is willing to do some opening up our forest, I wish there was a way to unwind that part of the bill. And I've been in the legislature here, obviously now for 3 years, but I don't know on a federal side, and it's something I want to speak with Congressman Bentz about. If there is a way to somehow come back and rework some of that, there might be. I just don't know the answer to it.
There's a couple possible solutions. One could be in a subsequent reconciliation bill passed by Congress. That provision could be amended or clarified. Congress could pass different legislation, maybe exempting the ONC lands from that provision, those types of things. So, the industry, counties, we're putting together ideas, not just on that revenue provision, but for forest management in general. How do we really fix the problem we're seeing on federal lands, make the forest more resilient to fire, to reduce the cost and impact of wildfire, but also to generate a more consistent flow of timber to our local mills that is consistent even with the intended outcome of Bill Clinton's Northwest Forest Plan, which was 75 million board feet, 77 million board feet for the MFAR. We're not even at 1/3 of what Bill Clinton promised us. So I would be a very happy person if we could just reach the Clinton level, let alone get beyond that to some Trump level.
I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that before. No, and also you brought up the spotted owl. I know there's going to be environmental issues that we're going to be looking at as well. But recently at the beginning of session, the federal, this was a Biden administration leftover. They were going to pay $13 million, I think it was, or what? No, it's $1.3 billion to harvest the barred owls. Try to because they were killing the spotted owls, and they're pushing them out of their territories and where they hunt. But then looking deeper in it, some of the things I found was that the obviously the barred owl is a much more robust species of owl, but the spotted owl needs the forest floor to hunt, right? And not having, not coming in and cleaning up after wildfires, and you just have this big mess of thickets of brush and reprod even before wildfires. Spotted owl they're not robust enough to survive. So the barred owl is just kind of taken over. I mean, I think we actually got that killed. I think myself and Representative Deal and Representative Scarlatus, we all sent a letter to Doge actually and said, hey, we think this is a horrible use of funds. And I was told yesterday, Representative Deal said that it sounds like the program did die finally. But I know you had mixed emotions about that, or mixed feelings on it, because you and I had a brief discussion on it. But I'm kind of glad to see it die.
I understand, the absurdity of the program and what's happening with the spotted owl, and this is what bothers me, just as a citizen, is that when I was in high school at Roseburg High School, we were at the peak of the spotted owl crisis, and the crisis was jobs versus owls. And if you want to continue logging, you're condemning the species to extinction. And I understand, no one wants species to go extinct, and so we suffered the consequences of the Clinton plan. We made the sacrifices to enact it. And 30 years later, the spotted owl is doing worse than it was when we started this. And the reason is because it's not because we're logging old growth. We're not logging old growth on federal lands. We're not. Those areas where there's spotted owls are protected in huge reserves. The problem is the reserves are burning, and they're burning at a higher frequency, at a higher intensity than the areas that we manage with logging.
Yeah.
And the environmental community refuses to even acknowledge that. And that's not me saying it. That's the Forest Service, that's the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's own literature is saying that here on the Umpqua and everywhere in Western Oregon. And so until you can stop those fires from decimating old growth ancient forests, the spotted owl is doomed. On the barred owl side, you're right. The barred owl continues to outcompete. And there seems to be very few ways to mitigate that. And there's scientific analysis coming out from very credible sources that will say that it's even worse than we believed, and that the spotted owl is likely doomed to extinction no matter what we do in the moist forests of Western Oregon.
Yeah. It's just, I hate, it seems like when man gets involved in the ecosystem, you either have to stay involved in it or just never get involved to start with. Once you've intervened into it and changed something, in other words, protecting a species, then you have to manage it. And it just feels like that's just not being done. Uh, One thing, last thing on that, there's a movement here amongst the local, more liberal side of the coin that says Douglas County needs to replace the timber industry with tourism, right? And I'm going, in my head, I think, how in the world could we do that? Well, I don't see an avenue for that because I don't see living wage jobs coming with tourism. Recently I had a discussion with one of the folks, and I said, okay, so they're saying, well, wineries and everything. I said, okay, well, great. Wineries locally here are typically owned by a couple or a family or whatever, and they might have, I don't know, 6 or 7 jobs that pay above minimum wage, whatever it is. And tourists come through, and it's seasonal, and they might spend, $100 at a winery, and they might go out to dinner and spend $100. That doesn't replace the property taxes for people buying houses. It doesn't replace heck, when you go down to work on your car and you go to local automotive shops to do it or whatever it may be, that money is back into the economy. It's being spent in the economy. I don't feel like tourism, for one thing, I don't think we have the natural attractions, although we do have Crater Lake and we do have Diamond Lake and we have the waterfalls and all that, and of course the coast. But I think we should be the seat of all of that. And I think tourism is a good Me Too business to bring along. But do you ever see an avenue for tourism to replace the timber industry? I mean,
I'd like to have them both.
I would,
And
yeah.
and that's what we should be focusing on. We have amazing landscape here.
Yes.
We have the most beautiful river in the world. We have one river guide, and a great company. They probably employ what, 5 people,
Yeah.
something like that, and
Not like a mill.
no, and not hundreds of people or thousands of people. And I think it's a decoy for environmental groups to say we should just stop natural resources industries and have tourism instead, because the consequences of environmental policy has been to create a hostile environment, physically hostile environment during tourist season here.
Yeah.
Who's going to come raft the river or hike or climb or fish when you can't breathe the air,
Yeah.
or you can't walk the trails, or the road's closed, or any of these things? And so there's an irony when they say that, and their own consequences are blocking the growth of tourism in this area. And I think we can have a better, more robust, more diverse economy if we invest more in our forest products industry, and we have more jobs in fuels and fire treatment and restoring the health of our forests. And that's where we can have jobs and build the tax base and those types of things. And it's not mutually exclusive with fly fishing or rafting or rock climbing or mountain biking. We should have them here, and having healthy managed forests is what will help that tourism industry in the future.
Oh, I agree 100%. I think we're seeing that in the forest. We're also seeing it in the green energy movement and other environmental movements. But at some point, you get to the point where you've gone too far. And I know right now, we have thousands of people in Oregon that are all suffering high electric bills because we have made it we being the legislature, we have limited your ability to get cheap power. And if we, as environmentalists in the legislature, continued, we would probably take all the dams out too, and all the hydroelectricity projects. We wouldn't allow nuclear. We want everything to run on the sun and everything to run on wind. Well, I don't know. I mean, you grew up here too. The sun doesn't always shine, although it is today. The sun doesn't always shine here, so it doesn't always. Electricity coming from solar panels don't always make sense. But I I feel like the tide has turned. I feel like we have hit those roadblocks that, frankly, 38 years of governors in Oregon that have pushed us in this direction. Now, all of that, the fruits of all of those labors, they're starting to come to roost. And I just hope that our future is brighter, but we'll see.
That's why we have you in the legislature.
I try. I try to just be common sense, right? I mean, there are some good things that we do and there are some bad things that we do, but what's good for this district, what's good for Southern Oregon is always first of mind. Okay. And of course, what's good for people. I mean, Oregon has 4 million people plus, a little of 4.3 million, and we shouldn't forget any of them. That doesn't mean we should, give one particular class of protected person or people's, free reign to do whatever they want. Everybody, all the things we do should encompass the entire state, population, but it doesn't make sense that sometimes some of the laws we pass are, sometimes I just have to, plug my nose. I still vote no, but, anyway, well, hey, we're winding up here. I think we've got a few minutes. Is there anything, Matt, you'd want to touch base on before we wind up?
Yeah, I think my closing thought is, when we talk about county budget issues or education or infrastructure, roads, I know that's a big topic in the state. Um, everyone's, well, how are we going to pay for this? We got to increase taxes. And here in Douglas County, the answer to most of those questions is sitting right up there on the hill. We have the revenue and the resources in those trees that can be managed renewably, responsibly, forever. And we just have to go get it. And we can do that more responsibly here than in anywhere in the world. And if we don't do it here, someone else is going to do it to fill the market for wood products. And I would rather have a tree harvested on private or federal or tribal land or state land here in Douglas County than I would in Canada or South America or Russia or Sweden. And so I think there is even an environmental responsibility to create those products here where we can have stringent environmental oversight over that, and where the trees grow faster than they do in other places and stronger and better. So I just hope that as our society starts tackling and our legislators and governments are starting to tackle these issues, that the forests really are part of that solution. And I know that for you and for our other local state legislators, absolutely our county commissioners, they understand that more than anyone. But for people who maybe have moved to the area recently and don't remember how much timber used to produce and pay for in this community,
Right.
I'd love to show them the numbers and show them what's possible. Even under conservative scenarios, we could be providing the county with tens of millions of dollars of additional revenue each year to pay for public safety and health services and libraries and the dump that we didn't have to use to pay for to go into, and just little things like that. We used to be a rich county.
Yes,
And I live in Glide. I was born in Glide, and I remember my dad, we would drive by the Glide school, and he'd said, "Do you know why that school looks better than any other public school?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Two letters, O and C."
Yeah.
He said, we have more resources available to this county that allow us to kind of punch above our weight and do better than the other counties in Oregon. And I think we've lost that through decades of failed policies, and now is the time to start fixing those.
Yeah, hopefully we can get a Republican governor in office, and we can turn some of this stuff around. That's my hope. But yeah, I sure appreciate you coming on. I hope to have you back if you'll come back and talk to us some more at some point. When this podcast is relatively new, I think this is our 13th episode or something along those lines, 14th, but 12th episode. So we're always going to focus on those topics that affect our community first, and this is this is something that we could have discussions for hours, and I'm sure you're aware. But thank you for doing that. I'll wrap up real quick with letting everybody know we still don't have a solution for the ODOT transportation package, the House Bill 2025 package. There has been negotiations happening. There has been discussions happening with the governor, as well as, from my understanding, both parties are not necessarily at the table, but they are aware. I did participate in an update from ODOT here about a week ago. ODOT really didn't want to answer much, didn't have good solutions. And actually, I shouldn't say just ODOT, it was also the governor's office as well. We had an informational meeting for about 45 minutes online with all the senators and all the representatives. So it's a big hurdle. I don't know that the solution is there yet. Hang in there. I do feel like there is money. I feel like there's a way to make this thing work, and I don't want to see anybody lose their jobs or be laid off, especially going into the winter. I think we're going to need ODOT to do the work that they do. So I will keep updating you as I find out. And also stay tuned in the future. We're going to start doing we'll do once a month a live podcast, and we'll have some other senators and representatives on here with us, and we'll be taking questions. So that's kind of a new twist to some of the things we're going to do. So prepare your questions if you have them. It should get entertaining, I'm sure. Hopefully we can answer your questions for you. So with that, Matt, thank you again. Appreciate you coming on the show. And again, stay with us in the future, and like us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. Follow us, and the more you follow us, the more you like our podcast, the bigger this will get. And this is your voice of Southern Oregon. So thank you all, and have a great the rest of your week.